Hello, welcome back. Now, you remember these scenes, police having to break up queues of people who had waited hours, some of them before sunrise, to register at a new NHS dentist in Bristol. They were desperate to sign up and get an NHS appointment, with some resorting to DIY dentistry. Well, the government has reacted, finally publishing a long-awaited dentistry recovery plan. But is what's in it going to make enough of a difference? And is there any faith that this crisis, which, let's face it, has been brewing for some years in dentistry, can finally be solved? Well, with me in the studio tonight, Dr. Kunal Patel, a dentist who owns a mix of NHS and private practices, and joining us from Bristol, Norman Stevenson, a teacher who is in such dire need of dental care. He's been forced to take some pretty drastic measures. Good evening to you both. Norman, I'm going to come to you first. You were actually in that queue in Bristol this week. Tell me why you were there. What kind of problems have you been experiencing? Because you've been taking some desperate measures.
Yes, I was in a desperate situation. I actually tried to communicate with the my original Bupa dentist that closed down before. I moved to Keynsham, and I was prepared to drive all the way to Keynsham to see her, but I was not allowed to see her, and they were just talking about private treatment. Mm-hmm. So I gave up on that, and then I tried. I was told to phone 111. I phoned 111, and they sent me to several dentists, not just the Bupa organization, gave me numbers, yeah. And I tried those numbers, and all they were interested in was private patients. And some said that they had enough NHS patients already and couldn't take no more. Some just were not interested, but I just couldn't get through. So I just practically gave up, really, yeah, because the reason why I done that was because these dentures were kind of like split in two, yeah. And I was desperate because I am an artist and I'm a performer, and I need to have my lovely smile, you see. So when I did phone those dentists in Keynsham, they actually made me know about 2 months ago that this new practice was going to open in Bristol before it was even announced anywhere. So I was prepared for that, you see. But still, I wasn't prepared for the queue that I came and met, you see.
And you were right at the back of it. You were right at the back of those hundreds of people. Because in the meantime, you've been sent around the houses trying to get a dental appointment. In the meantime, what were you having to resort to keep your lovely smile?
Well, obviously, I've got to hear it. I was hard plastic glue. I tried several, what do you call them, super glues, but they were too brisk. Yeah, and it kept snapping every time I tried to bite into something. And then I've discovered this plastic, hard plastic glue that kind of fits with the dentist makeup of my dentistry. And I was able to, it had little movements, so it wouldn't break. So, yeah, I've had to use that ever since. But every couple of days or so, it finally breaks. So then I just have to go and do an operation over and over again.
I mean, Norman, it is amusing and you've got a great smile on your face because you found the glue that works. But this is serious. You know, you shouldn't be having to glue your dentures back together. You just need an NHS appointment to get it sorted. It would cost thousands to get a private appointment. Dr. Patel, I mean, Norman here is gluing his dentures back together. You run a mixture of clinics that take private patients and NHS patients. Yeah. What is the situation at the moment? Why can't people like Norman get an NHS appointment?
And I think, first thing, Norman, sorry to hear that, but the first thing you must know, as a professional, as a dentist, the reception staff, the team, the dentist, we want to help patients like Norman.
Because you're getting a bit of a bad rap at the moment.
We
don't think that's fair?
I don't think it's fair because I don't think patients or the public realise it's not the clinic's choice not to provide NHS treatment. If we're an NHS practice, we have a certain quota that we can only see a certain number of patients in. If we reach that quota to see someone like Norman, what I would have to do is call up an existing patient of mine and say, Mrs. X, do you mind not being a patient at my clinic anymore?
So you bump them off the list to get someone else on?
We would have to, because there's literally no quota to see a patient like Norman.
So essentially, the government says to you, OK, you can be an NHS practice, but we are only going to fund you to see 200 NHS patients.
It's similar. It's done in units of activity, but yes.
But essentially, that's it.
Yes.
OK, so you've opened these new clinics and you've applied for another contract, another quota, and what's been the response?
So we have 2 NHS clinics, Love Teeth, the original ones, and then we've opened 4 more. One is a kids-only dedicated clinic. So we thought, doing something really good for the community and the public. There's a huge crisis in kids.
Tooth decay is the #1 reason a child over 5 will end up in hospital.
Yes, and
it's a big problem.
And I have a child who's 5, so it was one of them parts when my child comes to me and says, Dad, which clinic do I get to go to? And I said, you pick from any of the Love Teeths. And he goes, no, they're for adults. I want a kids only. So I thought, OK, let's serve a purpose. Let's educate the population.
What help did you get from the government for that kids clinic? Nothing at all?
Nothing at all. And on top of it, we get a hard time because patients turn up thinking we're choosing not to see them on the NHS. So we've actually had to take things, and I'm not the only dentist that does this, but we offer adults £20 checkups, which are actually cheaper than the NHS, and we offer kids £5 a month to be seen.
So you're trying to do your bit, but essentially you want to provide NHS appointments, but the government are saying they haven't got the funding for you. Norman, I'm going to bring you in because you spent hours in that queue. You finally got to the front, and I'm pleased to say you've got an appointment at the end of March. Hooray.
Yeah.
You know, this is good news finally for you. But what were some of the other people in the queue telling you about their experiences of trying to get a dentist appointment and what they were going through?
Well, I mean, I was just hearing similar stories to mine. You're just phoning around, trying to get an appointment, and nobody, being in a position to get their appointment. Some being forced into private, paying private and trying to raise money for it. Myself couldn't raise enough money for it. They were telling me about £1,000 just to do this alone. And that's beyond me and beyond a lot of people within my social economic area, it's beyond them, you see. So some of them were actually disabled, standing in the queue, and in the end, they just realized that and had to make a special queue for the disabled people. But some already gave up and went home, because it was atrocious weather to be standing in, and so there was lots of complaints of people who has different problems, and they were just besides themselves, basically. So it's not very it's a scandal, I call it. I think it's scandalous. And I really think that this should be dealt with by those in charge of us. And it was actually a fight broke out in the queue that actually made them had to cancel and turn us away, you see. So this is not only happening in Bristol, it's happening up and down the country.
Yeah, well, Norman, Dr. Patel in the studio. Dr. Patel, before we went on air, you were saying, I said, those scenes in Bristol, and you said, look, if I announced I had more NHS appointments, I'd be seeing scenes like that outside my surgery.
I think it would happen in majority of the towns across the UK. I think we announced that we're accepting NHS patients and we have a huge quota. There'll be queues again. And I think I've been a dentist for 14 years in the NHS. I do have to say it's good to see the government finally addressing and knowing there's a crisis. But this scheme, I don't think it's even going to scratch the surface. Yeah,
let's talk about the government's plans, because they've announced this dental recovery plan. One-off £20,000 payments for dentists working in underserved areas, a new £15 patient premium for dentists seeing patients who haven't had a checkup in 2 years, £50 premium if they need significant work, and there's a new minimum unit of dental activity value of £28, which is up from around £25. People are saying the problem with that, the British Dental Association are saying the problem with that is that, yes, it's an extra £200 million earmarked to fund that plan, but in real terms, NHS spending on dentistry is down by £1 billion since 2010. More than 1,000 dentists have stopped working for the NHS since the start of the pandemic.
Yeah, it's been something that we've been talking about a long time. I was on the news during the pandemic trying to get us open and ask for more funding, because the problem we have is that the dentists are there. We want to work, we want to help. Unfortunately, for example, the things that the new government have come out with, the minimum for a unit of activity, that's good. That helps certain areas. I think that's right. I think these little areas that they're putting funding into, that's great. But majority, this £15 to £50 thing that seems like it's something that's going to be really helpful, they're not adding that to our contract values. For example, as a dental practice, I have a set quota, and what they're asking us to do is favour new patients that haven't been to the practice for over 2 years or anywhere over my existing patients. They're not adding to the contract.
So, again, it would be someone being bumped off the list and not having an NHS dentist.
And I think a lot of us dentists sat there yesterday and the day before trying to figure this out and say, is this right? Is this what they're encouraging us to see? There are certain practices that have very large contracts. Maybe it's making it easier for them to fulfil their contract.
OK.
It's not helping.
What is going to help? Because, you know, I'm talking to people like Norman, who is a performer, who is saying, you know, he needs his lovely smile to perform. And, you know, recruitment agencies are saying that bad teeth are an under-acknowledged reason that job hunters from disadvantaged backgrounds and postcodes get turned down for work. Has massive mental health implications. People don't want to show their teeth. They don't want to smile. It's isolating. There's a massive impact here, not just the physical pain. What can be done to help?
I think two things, OK? I think the way the NHS dentistry is carried out in the UK needs to be transformed. The way we deliver it as dentists to make it more feasible, financially feasible and in the patient's best interest. Number two, the government have to give the funding back into NHS dentistry. They've taken it out for many years. Bring it back in. We are a developed country in the UK. We're not behaving like a developed country in the way we're treating our patients in dentistry.
Apparently access to public-funded dentistry is worse than in Ukraine or Rwanda. That comes from the Economics Impact Health Inclusivity Index. What about when people say the dentists are coining it in through private work? That's why they don't want to work in the NHS. It's more lucrative to go and do it privately.
And yes, I understand why, because for me, for example, I've got a set of clinics. The private clinics that I have, even though we wanted NHS to help the community, do support the NHS dental practices I have. Because you can do 7 fillings or you can do 1 filling and the dentist will be remunerated in the same way.
OK, Dr Patel, I just want to give a final word to Norman and that smile that looks great at the moment down to your DIY dentistry, but just imagine how great it's going to look at the end of March. Just a final word for anyone out there who is suffering like you, Norman. What's your message to them in terms of keep persevering, keep hunting out that dentist? What would you say?
I say take up your own DIY. Yeah, look, I'm going to say this. It's not the first time I've done DIY. I've had to pull my own teeth out as well because it takes so long.
No.
Yeah,
Norman, I hate to hear this. I hate to hear this. Dr Patel, advice for people like Norman who are going DIY. What can they do? Because this is serious.
It takes so long.
I think look around, because some dental practices will offer at least an examination for £20 or so, because tooth decay doesn't go away once it hits a certain point. We can't ignore it. At least get it screened and looked at.
All right, Dr Patel, thank you. And Norman Stevenson, thank you.